She was a plus-size girl no one had asked to dance in 26 years, mocked openly by her own stepsister beneath the crystal chandeliers of the most exclusive masquerade ball on the East Coast. Guests laughed as she stood frozen in the middle of the ballroom, red wine bleeding down the front of her borrowed silver gown, her cheeks burning under 100 cruel stares. Then a masked stranger crossed the marble floor without hurry, took her trembling hand, and pulled her into a waltz that silenced every whisper in the room. She did not know that the obsidian mask hid the face of the most feared man in the country. She did not know that by the time midnight struck, 3 of the people who had laughed at her would already be missing. She only knew that for the first time in her life, someone had chosen her out of a room full of women who had spent thousands trying to be chosen. The Ashford estate sat perched on the northern shore of Long Island, a 19th-century marble palace where the annual Ashford Masquerade Ball had been held every autumn for the last 112 years. The air inside the grand ballroom smelled of imported white gardenias, aged Kentucky bourbon, and the quiet, perfumed contempt of old money. Senators drifted past oil heiresses. Federal judges shared cigars with hedge fund kings on the balcony overlooking the Atlantic. Behind the sweeping double staircase, a string quartet flown in from Vienna played Tchaikovsky with reverent precision. The dress code was strictly enforced. Black tie, full mask, no exceptions. A single invitation was rumored to cost $40,000, though officially none were sold. You either belonged or you did not exist. Elena Marchetti did not belong. At 26, she stood 5'6" and carried 220 pounds on a soft, curved frame that the world had spent her entire adult life trying to shame her out of. Her dark auburn hair was pinned into a low, elegant chignon that she had done herself in the bathroom of a Queens subway station. Her borrowed silver gown, which had once belonged to her late mother Sophia, had been carefully tailored down and restitched over 3 sleepless nights by Elena's own hands. The seams were invisible. The bodice was tight across her chest. The gown was the only piece of her mother she had left, and she wore it like armor, even though she knew every woman in the room would see only the fabric straining across her hips. She should not have been at the Ashford Ball at all. She lived in a 4th-floor walk-up in Astoria, worked mornings at a floral shop off Steinway Street, and pulled overnight shifts at a bakery in Long Island City to help pay $6,200 a month for her grandmother's dementia care at the Sunridge Memory Facility upstate. She was 3 months behind. The eviction notice had arrived on Tuesday. The only reason she stood beneath the Ashford chandeliers tonight was because her stepsister Camille, a rising Vogue model with cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass, had extended the invitation with a smile made of knives. You should come, Elena. It'll be good for you to see how the other half lives. Her stepmother Diane had pressed the point harder over the phone. Wear something flattering, darling, if that's possible. What no one in that ballroom knew, what Camille and Diane had never bothered to learn, was that Elena Marchetti had earned a full scholarship to Columbia at 17 and finished a degree in Renaissance art history with honors before her mother's ovarian cancer forced her to abandon her master's program. She spoke 4 languages fluently, including the Sicilian dialect her late father Marco had taught her before the construction accident that killed him when she was 9. She had trained in ballroom dance for 8 years under a former Bolshoi instructor named Madame Yelena Petrova, because her mother, on the last clear night before the morphine took her voice, had whispered, "Promise me you will not forget how to dance. One day, the right man will notice." Elena had promised, and she had not danced in 4 years. She stood alone near the champagne fountain, holding a small clutch her mother had also once owned, trying to make herself invisible. It never worked. A senator's wife glanced at her figure and looked away as though she had witnessed something indecent. A young waiter offered her a napkin with barely concealed pity, as if her very presence were an accident. Across the room, Camille was already holding court in a scarlet Valentino gown, her mask lifted mockingly on a lace stick, her laughter carrying like breaking glass. "She's my charity case for the evening," Camille announced loudly to the circle of socialites around her. Poor thing insisted on coming. What could I do? The laughter that followed was soft, cultured, and cruel. Elena felt the copper taste of blood as she bit the inside of her cheek. She did not look up. She did not react. She had spent her entire life learning how to disappear inside her own skin. If you have ever been the person no one saw in the room, do me a favor before we go any further. Hit that like button right now and let me know you are still watching. Because what happens next is exactly why you clicked on this story. Trust me. Keep going. Camille approached her 10 minutes later, a fresh flute of red wine in her hand, her stepmother Diane trailing behind her like a satisfied general watching a battlefield. Elena saw her coming. She saw it the way you see a car sliding on ice a full second before impact. There was nowhere to move. "Elena, darling," Camille cooed, loud enough for the surrounding guests to turn. "You really should try the champagne." "Oh wait, I forgot. Red wine really is more your color, isn't it?" And with a perfectly rehearsed stumble, Camille tipped the full glass down the front of the silver gown. The wine bloomed across the bodice like a wound. A gasp rippled through the crowd, followed almost immediately by a soft, delighted laughter that spread like fire through dry grass. "Oh no," Camille said with theatrical horror, "I am so sorry." Though honestly, sweetheart, the dress already looked a little strained. Diane, standing behind her daughter, added with a cold smile, "Elena, dear, you were never built for silk. We warned you." Elena did not move. She did not cry. She did not look up. Somewhere behind her, a young woman she had never met whispered loud enough to be heard, "God, who even invited her?" Somewhere else, a phone camera clicked. Then another. The string quartet kept playing Tchaikovsky, but every conversation within 20 feet of Elena had stopped. Every masked face turned to witness the humiliation. Her hands trembled at her sides. Her spine stayed rigid. Her mother's silver gown was ruined, and with it the last physical piece of the woman who had once braided her hair and whispered promises about being noticed. Elena closed her eyes for 1 second, just one, and thought very calmly about walking into the Atlantic and letting the cold take her. That was the moment the mahogany doors at the top of the grand staircase swung open. The change in the room was not gradual. It was violent. The string quartet's violinist missed a note for the first time in the evening. A retired 4-star general stopped mid-sentence, with his mouth still open. Camille's laughter died in her throat. Every single guest turned, some slowly, some sharply, all of them silent, to look up at the man who had just entered. He stood at the top of the staircase in a midnight black tuxedo, cut so precisely it seemed to have been engineered rather than tailored. His mask was carved from polished obsidian and covered the upper half of his face, revealing only a hard, unsmiling mouth and a jawline carved from cold marble. On his left little finger sat a heavy silver signet ring that caught the chandelier light like a warning. 2 men in matching black suits flanked him 3 respectful steps behind, hands folded in front of them in the unmistakable posture of professional predators. They were not guests. They were armed. Every experienced eye in the room understood that instantly. Elena did not know who he was. She only knew that the entire ballroom had just been sucked into a vacuum, and that even Camille, who had never been afraid of anything in her privileged life, had taken a small involuntary step backward. The man began to descend the staircase without hurry. He did not scan the room the way rich men usually did, hunting for the most beautiful woman or the most powerful hand to shake. He looked bored. He looked as though he had already decided he did not want to be here. His dark eyes, visible behind the mask, moved once across the crowd with the detached indifference of a man reading a menu he had already memorized. His gaze slid over Camille, who had visibly straightened, hoping to be seen. It kept moving. It slid past 3 actresses, 2 heiresses, and a European countess. It kept moving. Then it stopped on Elena Marchetti, standing alone in a wine-stained silver gown beside the champagne fountain. And it did not move again. He walked directly toward her. The crowd parted for him without understanding why. Diane's smile stiffened into something closer to a grimace. Camille's champagne flute froze halfway to her lips. A federal judge stepped aside, so quickly he nearly stumbled. The stranger crossed the entire ballroom in a straight line, stopped in front of Elena, and inclined his head with a courtesy so old-world it belonged to a different century. He extended one gloved hand. His voice, when he spoke, was low, gravelly, and unhurried, the voice of a man who had never once in his life been interrupted. "May I have this dance?" Elena's mouth opened. Nothing came out. She looked down at the wine soaking through her mother's silver gown, at the ruined bodice, at the humiliating stain that everyone in the room had just witnessed and photographed. My dress," she managed, her voice cracking. The stranger did not look at the wine. He did not look at her figure. He looked directly into her eyes, held them, and said, loud enough for the closest 10 guests to hear him clearly, "Your dress is the only honest thing in this room." And then, quieter only for her, "Give me your hand, Elena." She had not told him her name. Her breath caught, but her body was already moving. Some deep part of her, the part her mother had trained for 8 years under a Bolshoi instructor's iron patience, knew exactly what to do. She placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, warm through the thin black leather of the glove, absolute. He led her onto the marble dance floor. The string quartet, who a moment ago had been playing Tchaikovsky, glanced at one another, and, without a word from anyone, transitioned smoothly into the opening bars of Strauss's Emperor Waltz. Elena would later wonder if the stranger had somehow arranged that too. His hand settled at the small of her back with the weight of a possessive anchor, not a courtesy. His other hand rose to meet hers at shoulder height. And then he began to lead. Her feet remembered before her mind did. For years of not dancing evaporated in a single measure. The muscle memory of 8 years under Madame Petrova's brutal discipline surged up through her body like a tide coming home. She matched him step for step, turn for turn. He was an extraordinary dancer, precise and controlled. But he was testing her, pushing the tempo just slightly, throwing in a subtle variation on a reverse turn to see if she would falter. She did not falter. She matched him. Then, on the second phrase, she quietly outdanced him, adding a delicate flourish of her own on the recovery step that only a formally trained partner would have executed. She felt his hand tighten at her back in surprise. She heard, very faintly, the sound of him exhaling a soft, amused breath against her temple. "Where did you learn to dance like that?" he murmured, so low that only she could hear him. "My mother," Elena answered, still looking over his shoulder. She said one day the right person would notice. There was a pause of exactly 2 beats. Then the stranger said, in a voice she would remember every night for the rest of her life, she was right. Elena finally looked up into his eyes. Behind the obsidian mask, they were dark, almost black, and lit with an intensity that had nothing to do with the chandeliers. She saw guests filming from every corner of the ballroom now. She saw Camille's face, pale and stricken, her scarlet gown suddenly looking cheap next to the raw, silent power of what was happening in the center of the floor. She saw Diane whispering furiously to a woman beside her, who was shaking her head slowly, as if to say no, not him, not that man. Elena did not understand yet, but she was beginning to. "Why me?" she whispered. "Out of everyone here, why me?" The stranger's mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile. He guided her through a slow, sweeping turn that brought his lips close to her ear. His breath was warm against her skin. And when he spoke again, he did not speak in English. He spoke in flawless, unhurried Italian, the kind of Italian that carried the specific rolled cadence of the Sicilian aristocracy, the kind Elena had not heard since her father died 17 years ago. "Perch tu eri l'unica in questa stanza che non stava recitando. I perch ti ho osservata per tutta la notte. Io deciso che nessuno ti avrebbe mai più fatto abbasser lo sguardo." Because you were the only one in this room who was not performing. And because I have been watching you all night, and I have decided that no one will ever make you lower your eyes again. Elena's step almost broke. Almost. Instead, without missing a beat of the waltz, without changing her expression, she answered him in the same fluent Sicilian dialect she had learned on her father's knee before he died. "Non ho abbassato lo sguardo per loro. L'ho abbassato per non colpire mia sorella davanti a decento persone." I did not lower my eyes for them. I lowered them so I would not strike my sister in front of 200 people. The stranger stopped dancing. For one full heartbeat, in the middle of the Emperor Waltz, in the middle of the Ashford Ballroom, In the middle of the most watched social event of the year, the most dangerous man in the country stood completely still with a plus-size floral arranger from Queens in his arms and stared at her as though he had just discovered something no amount of money could buy. Then, very slowly, a real smile spread across his lips. Not cruel, not amused, genuinely, dangerously delighted. He resumed the dance in perfect time, but his hand at her back had shifted, and his grip on her fingers had tightened by a fraction that Elena felt all the way down her spine. "You," he murmured in English, "are going to change my entire year." Elena did not know what he meant. She did not know his name. She did not know that in less than 15 minutes, he would remove his mask in front of 200 witnesses and detonate her old life into ash. She did not know that Camille's modeling contract would be terminated by breakfast, that Diane's country club membership would be revoked before lunch, or that the young socialite who had whispered who even invited her was about to see her father's political career dismantled by Tuesday morning. She did not know any of it yet. She only knew that the string quartet was still playing, that the entire ballroom was watching, and that for the first time in 26 years of being invisible, a man had looked at her across a crowded room and chosen her. Not despite the wine on her gown, not despite the softness of her body, not despite the whispers. Because of her. Before we continue, I need you to do one more thing for me. If this story is already pulling you in, if you can already feel what's coming next, hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss part 2. Because everything you just read, that was only the dance. The mask has not even come off yet. And when it does, 3 people in that ballroom are going to wish they had never been born. The final notes of the Emperor Waltz faded into the vaulted ceiling of the Ashford Ballroom, but the stranger did not release Elena's hand. He held it aloft between them, his gloved fingers still wrapped around hers, and the entire room held its breath, waiting to see what he would do next. Then slowly, deliberately, with the theatrical patience of a man who understood exactly how many phones were pointed at him, he lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a long, unhurried kiss to her knuckles. A soft gasp rippled through the crowd. Somewhere behind Elena, a woman actually whimpered. And then, without breaking eye contact with her, the stranger raised his free hand to his face and removed the obsidian mask in a single fluid motion. The reaction was instant and physical. An elderly senator near the champagne fountain dropped his glass. It shattered on the marble in the absolute silence of the room, and no one so much as flinched at the sound. A retired federal prosecutor took 3 involuntary steps backward and bumped into a marble column. Camille's scarlet-lipped mouth fell open. Diane went the color of old parchment. And from every corner of the ballroom, the same name began to spread in urgent, terrified whispers, passed from one masked mouth to the next like a lit fuse. Castellano. That's Dario Castellano. He never appears in public. Not since his father died. Not once in 7 years. Elena did not need the whispers to explain what she was looking at. Even someone as isolated as her had heard the Castellano name. The oldest Sicilian bloodline in the American Northeast. The syndicate that owned the shipping ports from Newark to Boston. That had outlasted 3 federal task forces and buried 2 rival families in a single winter. Dario Castellano was the man whose face federal prosecutors could not legally photograph, whose name was spoken in whispers even inside the FBI field office on Federal Plaza. He was 35 years old. He was rumored to have taken control of the family at 28 after his father's suspicious heart attack. And he was standing in the middle of the Ashford Ballroom with Elena Marchetti's hand still pressed against his lips. Every survival instinct Elena had left in her body screamed at her to pull her hand back and run. Instead, she looked directly into his dark eyes and held them. She did not know where the courage came from. She only knew that after a lifetime of lowering her gaze, she was done lowering it for anyone, even a man who could probably have her erased before sunrise. Dario saw it. His mouth curved into that dangerous, delighted smile again, and something flickered behind his eyes that Elena would spend the next several days trying and failing to name. He turned his body slightly, still holding her hand, and addressed the frozen ballroom in the same low, unhurried voice he had used to ask her to dance. It carried into every corner without effort. "This woman," he said, "is under my protection tonight. and every night after. His gaze swept the room once, cold and precise, and stopped on Camille. Anyone in this room who has spoken cruelly to her, laughed at her, or filmed her humiliation this evening will find their name on my desk by morning. I would strongly encourage those individuals to think very carefully about what they said, and to whom they said it, before I finish reading. Camille's champagne flute slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble beside the senator's. She did not even seem to notice. Diane was already pulling at her arm, hissing something urgent, trying to move her toward the exit. It was too late. Dario had already looked away from them, as though they had ceased to exist, which, in every way that mattered, they had. He turned back to Elena. "Come with me," he said quietly. "There is somewhere we can speak." She should have said no. She knew she should have said no. Instead, she nodded once, and let him lead her out of the ballroom, past 200 silent witnesses, through the mahogany doors, and down a private corridor lined with first edition Fitzgerald and Hemingway, into a firelit library at the eastern wing of the Ashford estate. His 2 guards took position outside. The heavy oak doors closed behind them, and for the first time since he had crossed the ballroom, Elena Marchetti was alone with the most dangerous man in the country. Dario poured 2 small glasses of Amaro from a crystal decanter, without asking what she wanted. He handed one to her. His hands were completely steady. Hers were not. She wrapped both of them around the glass to hide the trembling and refused to look away from his face. He studied her for a long moment over the rim of his own glass, and then he began to speak. Elena Sofia Marchetti, 26 years old. Born in Astoria General Hospital on March 14th. Father, Marco Marchetti, second-generation Sicilian. Died in a construction site collapse at the Hudson Yards excavation when you were 9. Mother, Sofia Marchetti, née Russo, ovarian cancer. Died 4 years and 2 months ago at Memorial Sloan Kettering. You have a paternal grandmother, Antonella, currently in stage 4 dementia care at Sunridge Memory Facility in Rhinebeck, at a cost of $6,200 a month. You are 3 months behind on payment. Your eviction notice was posted to your apartment door on Tuesday. You speak Italian, Sicilian, French, and passable Russian. You studied Renaissance art history at Columbia on full scholarship. You abandoned your master's when your mother got sick. He paused. Am I missing anything? Elena's mouth had gone completely dry. She set the Amaro glass down on the mahogany side table because she did not trust her hands to hold it. Yes, she said. Her voice came out lower and steadier than she expected. You are missing why you know any of that. Dario smiled faintly. I do not dance with strangers, Elena. Then this, she said, gesturing vaguely at the library, at the ball, at the wine still drying on her mother's silver gown, was not a coincidence. Nothing I do is a coincidence. She let that land. She let the full weight of it settle in her chest, and she made herself keep breathing. How long, she asked. How long have you been watching me? 3 weeks. Why? He set his own glass down and walked around the mahogany desk, closer to her, but not too close. He stopped an arm's length away and slid his hands into the pockets of his tuxedo trousers, and for a moment he did not look like a mafia boss at all. He looked like a tired man carrying something heavy. For months ago, he said, a private collector in Milan acquired a stolen Caravaggio, a minor work, but authenticated. It was originally taken from a church in Palermo in 1969. That church belonged to my grandmother's village. My grandmother died last spring. Recovering that painting was the last promise I made to her before she stopped recognizing my face. He paused. The collector is aligned with a rival family that would very much like to see me dead. He is auctioning the painting privately in Milan in 6 weeks to an invitation-only room of European buyers. I cannot walk into that room. Every face in my organization is known to Interpol. I need a buyer who is invisible. Elena felt the blood drain out of her legs. She sat down slowly on the edge of a leather wingback chair. You speak the languages, Dario continued quietly. You have the credentials. You have the eye. Anyone who checks your background will find a real Columbia graduate, real publications, a real life. Nothing forged. Nothing suspicious. And no one, in any file in any intelligence agency on Earth, connects the name Elena Marchetti to the Castellano family. Because you have been very careful not to be seen with me, Elena said. Until tonight. Until tonight, he agreed. Then why tonight? Her voice cracked slightly, and she hated it, and she kept going anyway. Why not just approach me quietly? Why the ball, the dance, the mask, the whole spectacle? Dario was silent for a long moment. When he answered, his voice had dropped into something rougher, more honest, and Elena understood in that moment that whatever he was about to say, he had not planned to say it. Because I watched a woman in a wine-stained gown be laughed at by 200 people tonight and not flinch. And I decided that if I was going to ask her to walk into a room full of European killers and gamble her life on my grandmother's painting, she deserved to walk in knowing that at least one man in this world had already chosen her out loud, in front of everyone, before she ever agreed to anything. Elena stopped breathing. He watched her face for a long moment, and then he said very quietly, I can make the offer without the dance, Elena. The offer stands either way. But I wanted you to have the dance first. I wanted you to have one memory of tonight that was yours before it became mine. If you are still with me right now, if that line just did something to you, do me a favor and drop a black heart in the comments before you keep reading. I need to know how many of you felt that. Now, let's finish this. Elena did not answer him for a long time. She looked at the fire. She thought about her grandmother in Rhinebeck, who had not recognized Elena's face in 14 months, but still hummed the same lullaby Elena's mother had sung to her as a child. She thought about the eviction notice on her door. She thought about Camille's laughter. She thought about her mother's dying whisper, one day, the right person will notice. She thought about the way Dario Castellano's hand had felt at the small of her back. And then, finally, she looked up. If I do this, she said, I need 3 things. And they are not negotiable. Dario's mouth curved slightly. Tell me. 1. My grandmother's care is guaranteed for the rest of her life, no matter what happens to me. It comes out of your accounts. Automatic. It never stops, even if I fail, even if I die, even if you decide tomorrow that you regret this. She is not leverage. She is protected. Done. 2. I am your partner, not your weapon. I see every file. Every player, every risk. You do not send me into a room I have not already read the intelligence on. I am not your beautiful decoy. I am your eyes. Dario's expression did not change, but something in his shoulders did. Agreed. 3. Her voice steadied. If I ever say stop, you stop. No matter how close we are to the Caravaggio. No matter how much money is on the table. No matter how many years you have been chasing this. If I say stop, we walk. That is the deal, or there is no deal. For a very long moment, Dario Castellano just looked at her. Then he did something Elena would remember for the rest of her life. He reached down to his left hand, slid off the heavy silver signet ring from his little finger, and placed it in her palm. This ring, he said, has belonged to the head of the Castellano family for 4 generations. My father wore it. My grandfather wore it. Before them, my great-grandfather in Palermo. No one else has ever worn it. Not my mother. Not my brothers. Not any woman I have ever known. Take it. When you wear it in any room in Europe, doors open, threats end, and my name walks in beside you whether I am physically there or not. It is the only agreement I make, Elena. And it is the only one I have ever needed to make. Her fingers closed around the silver. Yes, she whispered. Say it again. Yes. Dario Castellano exhaled, and for the first time all night, the granite in his jaw softened. He lifted her hand, the one now closed around the ring, and pressed another slow kiss to her knuckles, just as he had done on the ballroom floor. Then welcome, Signora Marchetti, he said quietly, to the family. The consequences began before Elena had even changed out of the ruined silver gown. By 6 the next morning, Camille's exclusive contract with the Milanese fashion house Casa di Vanelli, which was quietly held by a Castellano-linked holding company registered out of Luxembourg, had been formally terminated for undisclosed reasons. Her agent was not returning calls. By 9, Diane had been informed by the Meadowbrook Country Club that her family membership had been unanimously revoked by the board, effective immediately, and that her husband's investment firm had lost 3 of its 5 largest clients overnight. By noon, the young socialite who had whispered, who even invited her, was watching her father, a 2-term congressman, sit rigid on live television as an anonymous ethics complaint containing 15 years of financial documents was quietly filed with the House Committee on Ethics. None of it was traceable. None of it was illegal. All of it was devastating. Somewhere in a Manhattan penthouse overlooking Central Park, Dario Castellano was pouring espresso for a plus-size floral arranger from Queens who was wearing a silk robe and watching the news from a balcony 42 stories above the city that had spent her entire life pretending she did not exist. She turned to him as he handed her the cup. "You did this," she said quietly. "They did this," he corrected, standing behind her, not touching, but close enough that she felt the warmth of him against her back. "I only stopped protecting them from consequences they earned years ago. Your stepmother has been laundering money through her husband's firm for 11 years, Elena. Your stepsister's contract was contingent on a morality clause she has violated 47 times on record. The congressman built a career on votes he sold to men my family knows very well. I did not invent their sins. I only stopped letting them hide behind yours." Elena took the espresso. Her mother's ruined silver gown had been quietly collected in the night, and she would later discover, restored by a Milanese conservator over the next 3 weeks, and returned to her in a garment bag, as though the wine had never touched it. She looked out over the park. She looked at the silver signet ring on her thumb, too heavy and too large, and yet somehow already familiar. She looked at the reflection of Dario Castellano in the glass, watching her carefully, giving her every possible chance to change her mind. She did not change her mind. "When do we leave for Milan?" she asked. His reflection smiled slowly in the glass. 6 weeks. Enough time to teach you everything you need to know. Enough time to buy you a wardrobe that fits the woman you actually are, not the one they tried to shrink. Enough time, he added more quietly, for you to be sure. She turned to face him. She was still barefoot on the marble floor of a penthouse she had walked into less than 12 hours ago. Her hair was loose down her back. The silk robe was tied at her waist over the soft curves that Camille and Diane and every man before Dario had spent her lifetime teaching her to apologize for. And Dario Castellano, the most feared man on the eastern seaboard, was looking at her the way a starving man looks at bread. "I am already sure," Elena said. He crossed the distance between them without hurry. He did not kiss her. Not yet. He lifted her hand instead, the one wearing his family's ring, and pressed his forehead very gently against her knuckles. And Elena Marchetti, who had stood alone in a wine-stained gown 12 hours ago while 200 people laughed at her body, understood in that single moment that she was never going to stand alone again. 6 weeks later, in a private auction house off the Via Monte Napoleon in Milan, a plus-size American art historian in a custom-tailored emerald Valentino gown walked into a room full of European killers wearing a silver signet ring on her right hand, spoke 4 languages in a single evening, and left the building with a stolen Caravaggio, a $97 million debt collected in full from the man who had ordered the death of Dario Castellano's grandmother, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that the invisible girl from Queens was gone forever. But that, my loves, is a story for another night. So tell me, honestly, in the comments below, would you have taken the ring? Would you have walked into that Milan auction house? Or would you have handed the silver back and walked out of that library the moment you learned his last name? Because there is no wrong answer, but I promise you this. Every single one of us has been Elena Marchetti in some ballroom in our lives, standing in a stained gown while the world laughed, praying that one person, just one, would cross the room and choose us out loud. If this story reminded you that you were never actually invisible, that the right people have always been walking toward you, and you just have not seen them yet, then do me one last favor. Hit that like button. Share this story with the woman in your life who needs to hear it tonight. And subscribe, because next week I am telling you exactly what happened inside that Milan auction house. And it involves a poisoned glass of champagne, a dead Russian oligarch, and the moment Elena Marchetti pulled a Beretta out of an emerald Valentino gown and pointed it at the man who killed Dario's grandmother. You do not want to miss it. Some men see women as decorations. Some men see them as weapons. But the most dangerous men in this world, they see them as equals. And they will burn the whole ballroom down to prove it. Good night, my love. And remember, you were never the charity case. You were always the Caravaggio.